Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Welcome to my new study. If you didn't see my last video, we have moved house, which is very exciting. We left our apartment after 7 years. We're not very moved in yet. No books are unpacked. Some of the books I'm going to be speaking about today for my favorite books of 2025 are still packed away. The walls are blue. This is a kind of tealy blue throwback color, a color that will not be staying. And we're going to get started with my favorite books of 2025. Without any further ado, let's jump into it and I can kick off this video beginning with On Beauty by Zadie Smith. This is a 2005 novel, a kind of lit fic artsy novel. I started picking up some arty novels this year because I was doing research for my novel Project Spiegeltent, which is a Künstlerroman, not to be confused with the Bildungsroman. This is the artist's coming of age story. So I wanted to pick up a number of arty books this year, and On Beauty by Zadie Smith was one of those. So it follows this biracial family who live mostly in the US. So this is the Belzy family. The father of the family's name is Howard. He's a professor and a Rembrandt scholar. His wife's name is Kiki, and it's this kind of family drama. Howard is a white Englishman and Kiki is African American, and so it looks a lot at the conflict that arises naturally from racial differences and cultural differences within the family and the different experiences of the kids, especially compared to Howard, their father. There's all this like messy context that you have to read as you get deeper and deeper into the story. And to be honest, I didn't like any of the characters aside from I really liked Kiki. Kiki was wonderful. I hated Howard. He was awful. So I didn't love a lot of the characters, but I loved the characterization. I thought the characterization was beautifully done. I thought the sentences were beautifully written. Zadie Smith is such a talented writer. I've read some short fiction from her before. So I really, really loved the audio. I read the audiobook of this, by the way. Such a messy, complex story, a messy, complex family. It mostly focused on the dynamics of the family, which was just artfully done, very intricate, really, really good. So many small, quiet moments, domestic tragedies, the kind of thing that is really believable and tangible and just beautifully written. Again, Howard's a Rembrandt scholar, so that was part of the reason why I picked it up, because I knew it was a well-known book for having artistic themes. I wished it had gone a little bit deeper into the arty stuff because that was what I kind of wanted to research, but I really appreciated the story. The storytelling was amazing. The characterization was excellent. Such a sad, quietly tragic novel in many ways. I thought it was absolutely brilliant and I really, really enjoyed On Beauty by Zadie Smith. My next favorite one is The Brothers Grimm by Anne Schmeising. This is a biography of the Brothers Grimm, and I mostly focused on the first half of this book when I was reading it for my Oxford class that I did on folklore. I just got my feedback for that essay and it went really well, so I'm really, really pleased. I'm really happy. I loved doing my Oxford class on folklore. It was such a joy to step back into study after so many years, but I loved reading this biography. I thought it was so brilliantly done. Again, I focused mostly on the first half, like that was mostly what I used. I thought it was so well written. I thought it was really, really engaging, really fascinating. I think it's been a while since there's been an English language biography on the Brothers Grimm, so this was published maybe last year, I think it was 2024, but I decided to read it because it was really well recommended in the class. We had a whole week basically on the Brothers Grimm. I was really interested in the Brothers Grimm because the Brothers Grimm were working men. They needed to earn money. They were collecting these folk tales because they wanted to establish a kind of national identity for Germany, because at this time, right after the French Revolutionary War, I learned a lot, guys. Germany as we know it wasn't a country, and then it got occupied by France, and then Jacob Grimm ended up being the librarian to Napoleon's brother Jerome, and despite that he started collecting these German folktales, but also the brothers wanted to sell the folktales at the Christmas markets to earn some money because they were working men. They did not come from nobility. They didn't do very well, and so what ended up happening is that the Grimm brothers started tailoring the fairy tales to the bourgeoisie audience that they were trying to sell to, and so I wanted to write my essay around that, the implications of them being working men. Anyway, I found this so fascinating. I did actually end up putting that essay up on Patreon, so if you want to check it out, it's up on Patreon. The next one is The Forest Brims Over by Maru Ayase, translated from the Japanese by Hayden Trowell. This is a really weird, beautiful, nature imagery heavy book that I picked up the last time we were in Tokyo. Normally, I do so much research before I buy a physical copy of a book. Like, I'm so particular about the books that I buy because I want to build my personal collection of books slowly and really sustainably. I love going to the library. I love borrowing digital books, all of that kind of thing. Was in a bookshop. I looked at this, I read the blurb, and given that I'm interested in artists and muses and all that kind of thing at the moment, I was so intrigued. This is the story of a man man who is a writer who uses his wife as a muse a lot for his writing. So he uses her personal stories, some really, really intimate stuff about her, and she, wanting to get some revenge because she felt a bit suffocated in the marriage and all this stuff was going on, ends up eating some seeds and she starts to become a forest. And so it's this really interesting, weird, speculative novel. It's quite short. Some of the chapters are told from the perspective of the editor of this writer who's come into this dynamic, and he's like, why is this woman eating seeds? Why is she turning into a forest? I thought it was just beautifully done, and there were a lot of really interesting themes here around marriage in Japan, around gender dynamics in Japan. This was just really cool, like a really good speculative, literary, contemporary story in translation. I loved reading it. It's so short. I just breezed through it. It's a little bit weird and wacky, and it's the type of thing that's just delighting me at the moment. So I really enjoyed that one. The next one is Cat's Eye by Margaret Atwood. Again, this year I was trying to pick up a lot of arty books about painters and artists and anyone particularly creative. Anything that sort of felt like the life of an artist encapsulated was the kind of book I was trying to pick up this year, and I'll probably keep doing that next year as well. This is the story of a painter whose name is Elaine, and she looks back at her life and her childhood. And Margaret Atwood, of course, is a beautiful writer. The Handmaid's Tale is one of my favorite books I've ever read. I think Margaret Atwood is so amazing. She had a memoir come out not that long ago, which I do really, really want to read, but I picked up Cat's Eye wanting to read about the life of an artist, and essentially this artist is reflecting on her childhood, and her parents are kind of a bit, for want of a better phrase, like hippie-ish when she's little. So they're moving around a lot and they're in the countryside a lot, they're doing a lot of camping, and they don't really have any one specific home, and then eventually they settle. And the painter is reflecting on the time when she was a child and she started going to elementary school and the friendships she made, and she looks at these themes of bullying and how she was treated as a girl by the other girls, and like oh my god, like was so sucker punched by this. It was ever so gently triggering for any of us who have had like toxic friendships when we were kids, especially for girls. Oh my god. But aside from that, beautifully told. Margaret Atwood is such a brilliant and talented writer. I really enjoyed getting to hear about this woman's life, and Margaret Atwood generally is such a transportative I think that's a word, writer, in that I always feel transported by her writing. The imagery is brilliantly done. It's descriptive and gorgeous without being purple or overwrought. I feel like I can really clearly picture the scenes when I'm reading a Margaret Atwood story. Like I feel so immersed in the book. The characters are brilliant and nuanced and interesting. The dialogue's amazing. Just honestly, everything Margaret Atwood does is like tick, 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 tick for all of my tastes. The next one is The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. Now you would have seen me reading this book if you watched my Joan Didion writing routine. I decided to start reading this book, and then I kind of finished it during the filming of that writing routine, and oh my god, I cried so many times. This is a memoir written by Joan Didion, who's a really well-known writer. I think it was in 2004, had this nightmare year where her daughter, who I believe was in her late 20s or 30s, she wasn't terribly young when this happened, her daughter Quintana was ill. She was in the ICU. She had just gotten married. Joan's daughter was very, very ill, and then Joan's husband suddenly dies. And so it follows this year as Joan's trying to make sense of the death of her husband. And if you're interested in the lives of writers generally, there's some really good insight into this for Joan Didion, but also it just kind of follows her journey. I mentioned this a lot in the writing routine, where Joan Didion has this incredible concrete style. Like her style is the opposite of flowery. There's not a lot of adjectives here. She's very to the point. And so when you get these moments where she talks about his death's effect on her, it's just harrowing. Like it's beautifully done. So many moments where I was reading this and just one sentence would catch me off guard and I would just start tearing up. I loved getting to hear about her life through the lens of this year, because of course she talks about the experience of watching her husband die basically, and then she goes back into these anecdotes of when their daughter was really small and her life with him and projects they worked on together and little habits they had, like the fact that they would go walking through Central Park. They would start walking together and then their paths would divert because they liked going on different routes, but they'd always meet up. Beautifully told, like really sad. So I'd recommend being in a good headspace when you read this one. The next book I want to talk about is The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany. Now I've been trying to finish reading this book for maybe a year or longer. I don't know, I literally don't remember when I started trying to read this book. It is incredibly beautiful. So this is a pre-Tolkienian fantasy. Now if you know anything about the fantasy genre, that's really significant. significant because Tolkien essentially invented fantasy as we know it, fantasy with all of its modern structures when he wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. So everything that came before Tolkien in Western writing basically draws from either the fairy tale tradition or Arthurian legend or that sort of thing, local folk tales or folklore. This one very much draws from a fairy tale tradition. It has this beautiful, omniscient fairy tale voice to the story. Alfric, the son of the king, gets sent off to Elfland to go and get a magical bride, and he meets Lirazel, who is the titular daughter of the Elf King, and it has all of these implications for their lives together. I loved the way that the passage of time was done in this story. I loved the imagery. I underlined so many things. Like, there were so many moments of just gorgeous magical imagery, passages of flowers and like magical things in the actual country of Elfland. Like, it's just so beautiful. I loved this. And this was actually our book club book for the month of December, so I'm gonna have a book review going up there really soon. I've already filmed it, but I do need to edit that video. And I do say in that video I loved this, but the reason why it wasn't my favorite book of the year is that I wish that I had have felt just a little bit more connected with the characters. But because it has this omniscient fairy tale voice, it's very hard to feel like you're really in the psyche of the characters when you're doing true omniscient. But it was such a strong 5-star. I loved this book. The next book is Mariana by Monica Dickens. Now, I started reading this book because I just saw it in a throwaway Instagram story by Samantha Shannon, who wrote The Priory of the Orange Tree, who said that she absolutely loved this book. It's written by either the granddaughter or the great-granddaughter of Charles Dickens. So Dickens, she is actually related to Charles Dickens. Essentially, this is a coming-of-age story for a young girl whose name is Mary, set during the intra-war years, so mostly in the 1930s. And it's such a quiet, slow, basically slice-of-life novel just about her experiences. And so we start with her. She's in a cottage. She's a little bit older, and she finds out on the radio that her husband is missing. And so she starts panicking, and then she thinks about her life leading up until this point. And the story just essentially follows the structure of her life. So we get all these chapters from when she's a child and the boy she had a crush on and her experiences of going through school. She's raised by a single mother. She has this uncle who's really zany and her grandmother who's very stern and all of her cousins, and just follows her life. And it's so beautiful and slow, and I loved the details in this story, and the writing is just absolutely gorgeous. So it's essentially a Bildungsroman, but it's just a very quiet and gentle story about a young woman's life in the 1930s and, you know, the years either side of that. I can't really give away any more about the plot without revealing spoilers, but I do really love Mary's character. I loved getting to see her grow. I loved getting to see her being boldly confident, and she does some really just wacky things, which is joyful, and she's emotional, and we get to see her heartbreaks, and I loved it. It was so brilliantly done. This is my first book that I've bought from Persephone Books, and they publish like forgotten classics, and so this story isn't very well known, but I loved it. The next one is Record of a Night Too Brief by Hiromi Kawakami. and translated from the Japanese by Lucy North. I have read a number of Hiromi Kawakami's other novels. I've read Strange Weather in Tokyo. I've read Nakano Thrift Shop. I enjoyed reading those books, but they weren't like outrageous 5 stars for me. Whereas this book is so weird and strange and just brilliantly told. So there's basically 3 different short stories in this book, and the main one I love is the first short story. It's kind of like a fever dream where this woman is walking through this market slash festival thing, and like this other woman like becomes small and turns into a flower, and then it's just like weird things start talking to her, and it's just the most surreal and absurd and weird story. It's brilliant. Like, I loved how strange these stories were. I just loved that I had no idea what was going to happen next. I loved the imagery. I loved the way it was written. I thought it was really creative and brilliant. And again, there's some really weird stuff in here, but I thought it was so well done, and I was really surprised because, again, I liked Hiromi Kawakami's other novels, but they didn't really grab me and they didn't really feel special or distinctive, whereas this one, oh my god, it does. So I wish Strange Weather in Tokyo had have been speculative and zany and strange in the way that this book is speculative and zany and strange. So my final 2 books, my favorite 2 books of 2025, again, is a coin toss between which one I love more. So I had this last year when I read Orbital and Our Lives Under the Sea, where I couldn't work out really which one I loved more, but I do think I loved Our Wives Under the Sea just a little bit more because it was longer, had speculative elements in it, which tends to be my jam. Honestly, right now, kind of feels like a coin toss as to which is my favorite book, so I love both of these for different reasons. But I'll start off with my second favorite book of 2025 is Stoner by John Williams, and this is another kind of forgotten classic, and I had a really good chat with a man at a bookstore actually. So at Orchard Bookshop, there's a really cool bookshop in Adelaide Arcade. Anyway, when I was buying this book, and I do have a beautiful copy, but it's packed away somewhere, so I couldn't tell you where it is. So again, this story is a Bildungsroman. It's a coming of age story about this man who is born on a farm to parents who are working class, who are not educated, and he ends up going off and studying literature, and the man's name is Stoner. When I picked up the book originally, I was wondering if there were going to be any drug themes in it, and there didn't happen to be. So his name is William Stoner. Stoner is his last name. Stoner ends up going off to college, and despite his background, he falls in love with English and literature, and he ends up becoming academic, so he kind of stays in the university. So in many ways, this is a campus novel. This novel is just so simple, and there were so many passages that were just incredibly moving, but so engaging, and the plot was quite slow, and we kind of slowly go through Stoner's life, and we get to see these quiet domestic tragedies. So there's a bit of a theme here for this year for quiet domestic tragedies, quiet coming of age stories, slice of life novels. I felt so moved by just the story of this ordinary man who came from nothing and who fell in love with books and who wanted to read. And again, it's kind of a forgotten classic, this one. So I think it's having a bit of a resurgence now because people are talking about it on social media. I was really upset on Stoner's behalf because he's this kind of gentle man who doesn't really stand up for himself very much, and yeah, I loved it. I thought it was so good, so beautifully done. And then my favorite book of 2025, I'm so excited to say, is Junie by Erin Crosby Eckstein. This is an advanced reader copy. I was very, very lucky because Erin actually sent me a copy of this book because it's not technically published in Australia yet. I think Erin sent me this at the end of last year, and just because I'm a dropkick, took me a while to read it, and the second I started reading it, I was like, wow, I love the voice of this, I love the characters. I just felt immediately engaged with this story during a time where I was really struggling to pick up books and to concentrate, and so this just felt like a breath of fresh air. This is another coming of age story. It's about the titular character of Junie, born onto a plantation in the antebellum South right before the Civil War. So slavery is very much happening here. So Junie is a slave, and she is friends with the daughter of the people who own the plantation and who own her. And so we have this really interesting, complex friendship between Junie and this girl. Junie is this beautiful character who has all of these hopes and dreams. She happens to know how to read because she was taught to read by her friend, and so she has all these bold aspirations and she loves the poets. And there's also speculative elements in this story as well because Junie starts seeing the ghost of her sister who died tragically. I loved this story. I thought it was brilliantly done. I loved the dialogue. I loved the characters. I particularly loved the character of Junie because I just thought she was so interesting and nuanced, and I just feel like I haven't gotten to see this character very much. Like this really hopeful 16-year-old girl. Like I loved reading this story. I loved the way that Erin approached these characters. Even though we have slave owners here in this story, they were all treated with nuance, and I especially loved the nuance with which Violet's character was treated. Violet is the daughter of the slave owners who is friends with Junie. I loved all the historical details. I think I mentioned this in my book review that I did again on Patreon. So we read this book for Patreon as well. I mentioned in that video that there were historical details I loved here. For example, Junie has to go and basically operate the fan while the family are eating breakfast because it's obviously very warm here. And during this time in the 1800s, they had these fans where the slaves would go and like pull this cord. So they actually had to like make the fans work, like manually doing that labor. And so little details like that were really interesting to see. And it felt like Erin did a lot of research. And also there is a note at the end of this book which says that Erin was drawing from a family story. So there was inspiration from Erin's own family. I love the speculative elements. They were quite gentle in the story. Like I was just just rooting for her so much. Like I just felt like she was so beautifully crafted and nuanced and hopeful, and oh god, I loved it so much. So I really enjoyed reading this book, and those were my favorite books of 2025. I love filming this video. It's like my favorite video to film every year. So I hope you enjoyed it. And also I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you for being here this year, for all of the support, for the comments, for turning up and clicking on these videos. I really appreciate it. Obviously we moved house, so I can't wait to show you more of the house. I can't wait to show you the study. So excited for next year. My book comes out next year. Oh my god, Theodora's Tea Shop is going to be published. So please, if you would like, feel free to pre-order my novel Theodora's Tea Shop. It's going to be out on July 28th, 2026. Pre-orders really help authors. So if you wanted to check that out, I would love that. If you can't, please feel free to check it out on Goodreads or Storygraph. You can add the book over there. And the final people I had to thank is everyone over on Patreon for supporting my channel, because without Patreon, I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't be able to make videos. Over on Patreon, we have so many bonus things, our book club, our Discord server. As I said, I posted the Brothers Grimm essay over there, and a number of books that were in my favorite books of 2025 we did read over on Patreon, and I have more in-depth reviews for those books over there. If you'd like to check out Patreon, there's a link in the description down below. Take care, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.